Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to embark on a journey to the exotic land of Siam, where East meets West in the enchanting musical, The King and I. The King and I is the fifth musical by the team of Rodgers and Hammerstein. The musical is based on Anna Lenowen's memoirs of her time as governess in Siam. Now, the musical's plot relates the experiences of Anna, who is a British schoolteacher and is hired as part of the king's drive to modernize his country. Now, the relationship between the king and Anna is marked by conflict through much of the piece, as well as by a love to which neither can admit. Traveling back in time to 1861, a scholar and former monk, King Mongkut, founded a new Buddhist order and a temple in Bangkok. At the time of Mongkut taking the throne, various European countries were striving for dominance, and American traders sought greater influence in Southeast Asia. Now, he ultimately succeeded in keeping Siam on an independent nation, partly by familiarizing his heirs and his harem with Western ways. Now, in 1861, Mongkut wrote to his Singapore agent, asking him to find a British lady to be governess to the royal children. At the time, the British community in Singapore was small, and the choice fell on a recent arrival there by the name of Anna Lenowens, who was running a small nursery school in the colony. Lenowens was the Anglo-Indian daughter of an Indian army soldier and the widow of Thomas Owens, a clerk and hotel keeper. Now, upon receiving the king's invitation, Lenowens sent her daughter Avis to school in England in order to give Avis the social advantage of a prestigious British education, and decided to travel to Bangkok with her 5-year-old son, Louis. Lenowens initially asked for $150 per month in Singapore currency, with an additional request to live in or near the missionary community to ensure that she was not deprived of Western company. King Mongkut and Lenowens came to an agreement, with Lenowens and Louis temporarily living as guests of Mongkut's prime minister, and after the first house offered was found to be a little unsuitable, the family moved into a brick residence within walking distance of the palace. Fast forward to 1950. So British actress Gertrude Lawrence's business manager and attorney Fanny Holtzman was looking for a new vehicle for her client. In writing the show, Hammerstein believed he found his door into the play while reading an account of a slave in Siam writing about Abraham Lincoln, eventually becoming the narrated dance, The Small House of Uncle Thomas. Since a frank expression of romantic feelings between the king and Anna would be inappropriate in view of both parties' upbringing and prevailing social moves, Hammerstein wrote love scenes for a secondary couple, Tup Tim, a junior wife of the king, and a scholar, Lun Ta. The musical's most radical change from the novel was to have the king die at the end of the piece. The pair had to overcome the challenge of how to represent Thai speech and music. Rodgers chose not to use actual Thai music, fearing the accessibility with American audiences. Instead, he gave the music an exotic flavor, using open fifths and chords in unusual ways, and unusual keys to create more pleasant tones. Still facing the problem of how to represent Thai speech, the pair chose to convey it by musical sounds made by the orchestra. Producer Leland Hayward, who had worked with the duo on South Pacific, approached Jerome Robbins to choreograph a ballet for Small House of Uncle Thomas. Robbins was extremely enthusiastic about the project and staged the ballet as an intimate performance rather than a large production number. His choreography for the Parade of the King's Children to Meet Their Teacher would also draw the greatest acclaim. The biggest task of the show was to cast the main part of the king, and the pair thought it essential that it be played by a well-known theatrical actor. Rodgers recounted the audition of a Russian-American performer. They told us the name of the first man, and he came out with a bald head and sat cross-legged on the stage. He had a guitar, and he hit his guitar with one whack and gave out this unearthly yell and sang some heathenish sort of thing, and Oscar and I looked at each other and said, well, that's it. Welcome, Yul Brynner. In any case, Brynner's fierce, mercurial, dangerous, yet surprisingly sensitive king was an ideal foil for Lawrence's strong-willed, yet vulnerable Anna. And when the two finally actually came together in Shall We Dance, the chemistry was impeccable. The show was budgeted at $250,000, which in today's money would equal over $4 million. At the time, making it the most expensive Rodgers and Hammerstein production. Now, fun fact here, the children who were cast as the young princes and princesses were not of Thai descent at all, but rather a wide range of ethnic backgrounds, including Puerto Rican and Italian. The King and I would eventually open on Broadway at the St. James Theatre in March of 1951, becoming an instant hit by the press and the public. Brenner turned in an outstanding performance that night, nearly stealing the show. The director, John Van Druten, described how Gertrude came on the stage with a new and dazzling quality, as if an extra power had been granted to the brilliance of her stage light. She was radiant and wonderful. The rave reviews in the newspapers led to not only Lawrence and Brenner winning Tonys for the work, but the entire production winning the Tony for Best Musical. Unfortunately, Gertrude had not yet discovered that she was nearing death from liver cancer, and her weakened condition was exacerbated by the demands of her role. Now, to give kind of a little insight into this, pretty much at the age of 52, the musical required her to wear dresses weighing up to 75 pounds, and while walking or dancing a total of 4 miles during a 3.5-hour performance 8 times a week. That's a lot of stress. Now, Lawrence found it hard to bear the heat in the theater during the summer months, having her understudy Constance Carpenter replacing her in matinees. Later in the year, Lawrence's strength returned and she resumed her full schedule. However, by Christmas, she was battling pleurisy and suffering from exhaustion. In February of 1952, she was hit with bronchitis, causing her performance to deteriorate. And on August 16, 1952, she fainted following a matinee performance and was admitted to the New York Presbyterian Hospital, where she would slip into a coma and die on September 6, 1952, from liver cancer at the age of 54. To honor her, the lights of Broadway and the West End were dimmed, and she was buried in the ball gown she wore during Act 2. The King and I would run until March of 1954 for a total of 1,246 performances, making it the 4th longest running musical at the time. A U.S. national tour would begin in March, opening at the Community Theater in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and after playing 30 cities, the show would close in December of 1955. The production would make its West End debut in the fall of 1953 at the Theatre Royal, with a warm reception by both audiences and critics. The cast starred Valerie Hobson, whose second husband, a British government minister, would become the subject of the Profumo affair in 1963. Czech-British actor Herbert Lom and Muriel Smith. Now, the production would see its first revival on Broadway at the New York City Center Light Opera Company in 1956, starring Jan Clayton, who would later star in the 1950s TV series Lassie. And the company would present the musical again in 1960 with Barbara Cook and stage and screen actor Farley Granger. The King and I would also see its first West End revival in the fall of 1973 at the Adelphi Theatre, starring Sally Howes and British television, stage, and film actor Peter Wyngarde. In July of 1976, a U.S. national tour would open in Los Angeles. Brenner, suffering so badly from laryngitis, lip-synced his son Rock, singing and speaking the role from the orchestra pit. The production would travel across the United States, selling out every single city it opened in, and finally appearing in New York at the Uris Theater in May of 1977, which is where the Gershwin Theater sits today. Before Brenner would play at the Uris, he insisted on renovations, stating that the theater resembled a public toilet. The tour was extended in 1979, with the production opening at the London Palladium in June of that year. The Palladium production was reported to have the largest advanced ticket sales in British history. Now, Brenner would tour with the show during the 1980s, and on September 13th, 1983, he would celebrate his 4,000th performance as the King, while unfortunately also being diagnosed privately with inoperable lung cancer that same day. After completing treatment to shrink the tumor, Brenner would return in 1985 when the show finally reached New York for its third revival at the Broadway Theater. During the run, Brenner was unable to sing a puzzlement due to what was announced as a throat and ear infection, but he projected bursting vitality to the top of the balcony. Having come to dominate the musical to such an extent, he would later receive a special Tony Award for his role as the King. The first major revival to break away from the original staging and interpretation was an Australian production in 1991. The production had a more sinister Siamese setting, a less elegant but more forceful Anna, and a younger King. The lines and lyrics were translated back into Thai to reinforce the atmosphere of a foreign land, and all Asian roles were played by Asian actors. A new spiritual ballet would be created for the King's entrance in Act 1, with a sacred white elephant procession in Act 2. The reds and golds were very much inspired by what the creative team saw at the Royal Palace, and set and costume elements reflected images, architecture, and other designs in the palace and elsewhere in Bangkok. Now, in April 1996, the production was revived for a second time on Broadway, starring Wonderful Town's Donna Murphy and 1987's La Bamba star Lou Diamond Phillips. The production was nominated for 8 Tony Awards, winning for Best Revival. The Broadway run, which lasted for 780 performances, would also star Faith Prince and American singer and actress Marie Osmond in the title role. The production would later be revived for a second time in the West End in May of 2000 at the London Palladium, taking in over $8 million in advanced ticket sales. A U.S. national tour would begin in 2004 before traveling back to London in June of 2009 for a limited engagement at the Royal Albert Hall. The production would also see its first Australian revival in 2014, starring New Zealand's operatic baritone Teddy Rhodes. Broadway would host the musical's 4th revival at the Vivian Beaumont Theatre in April of 2015. The production would star Kelly O'Hara and Letters from Iwo Jima's star Ken Watanabe. The production was nominated for 9 Tony Awards, winning 4, including Best Revival of a Musical. A U.S. national tour would begin in 2016, starring the West End's Mary Poppins, Laura Michelle Kelly. After being revived for a 3rd time at the London Palladium in 2018, the production would not only be filmed, but would also win the Olivier Award for Best Musical Revival. Now, a tour of the Lincoln Center production would tour both the UK and Ireland earlier this year, and is expected to continue until January of 2024, when the production is set to move into the Dominion Theatre in the West End for a limited run until March of 2024. Now, to back up, the musical was filmed in 1956, with Brenner recreating his role alongside Deborah Kerr. The film was nominated for 9 Academy Awards, winning 5, including Best Actor and Actress. The movie's script was faithful to the stage version and received enthusiastic reviews. As we reflect on The King and I, it's evident that the show's themes remain relevant and resonant today. In a world increasingly interconnected, yet often divided, the musical reminds us of the importance of understanding and respecting different cultures. The show's captivating melodies, heartwarming story, and enduring message of tolerance and understanding make it a true gem of the musical theater repertoire. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to today's video. If you enjoyed this, please comment on what you liked or disliked. I'd love to hear from you. And if you want to see other videos like this, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. And until next time, that's a wrap.